in the vast and desolate stretches of the Arizona desert, where the earth was cracked and dry and the air shimmered with heat, a lone Apache warrior named Taza moved silently across the land. His dark eyes scanned the horizon, sharp and alert, catching every movement, every shadow that dared to flicker in the harsh sunlight. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, jagged shadows over the rocky terrain. It was a place of both beauty and danger, a land that had been home to the Apache for generations, but was now being claimed by settlers who came from faraway lands. Taza's heart was heavy with purpose. He had been chosen by the elders of his tribe to carry out a mission that weighed heavily on his soul. A settler family had built a small homestead near the edge of Apache territory, their wooden cabin standing like an unwelcome scar on the sacred land. The elders believed this family posed a threat, not just because they had settled too close to Apache grounds, but because their presence signaled the beginning of something larger, a wave of outsiders who would destroy the balance of life the Apache had fought so hard to protect. Taza knew what he had to do. He had trained all his life for moments like this, honing his skills as a tracker, a hunter, and a warrior. But as he rode closer to the cabin, a strange unease began to creep into his mind. The journey to the settler's homestead had taken him through some of the harshest parts of the desert. The path was littered with thorny bushes, sharp rocks, and dry riverbeds that spoke of rains long gone. Taza's horse, a sturdy and loyal companion, picked its way carefully over the uneven ground. The warrior himself sat tall in the saddle, his body lean and strong, his muscles taut with readiness. Around his neck hung a small pouch containing herbs blessed by the shaman of his tribe. These herbs were meant to guide him and protect him on his mission, but even they could not silence the questions that whispered in the back of his mind. As he drew nearer to the cabin, Taza slowed his pace, allowing his horse to walk quietly so as not to alert anyone inside. The structure was modest, made of rough-hewn logs and patched together with mud and clay. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, rising into the clear blue sky. Chickens pecked at the dirt in a makeshift pen, and a small garden struggled to grow beside the house. Despite its simplicity, there was a certain warmth to the place, a sense of life that seemed almost defiant in such a barren landscape. Taza dismounted and tied his horse to a nearby tree, his movements deliberate and careful. He crouched low, blending into the natural surroundings, and observed the scene before him. Through the gaps in the wooden walls, he could see inside the cabin. A woman sat by the fire, her face illuminated by the soft orange glow of the flames. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped as if burdened by an invisible weight. Her hands moved slowly, stirring a pot that hung over the fire. Two young girls sat nearby, their laughter filling the room despite the obvious hardships they faced. They played with simple toys carved from wood, their smiles bright and innocent. Taza felt a pang of something unfamiliar stir within him. This was not what he had expected. He had imagined finding a group of armed men, perhaps farmers or ranchers eager to claim the land for themselves. But this was different. The widow's face caught his attention. There was sadness etched into her features, but also strength. Her eyes, though weary, held a determination that spoke of survival against great odds. Taza found himself wondering about her story. How had she come to live here, so far from the cities and towns where most settlers chose to build their lives? What had driven her to stake her claim in such a harsh and unforgiving place? And why was she alone, raising two daughters without the help of a husband or other adults? For a moment, Taza allowed himself to imagine what it must be like to live in her shoes. To wake each morning knowing that the day ahead would bring only more struggle, yet still finding the will to keep going. He thought of his own mother, who had raised him after his father was killed in battle. She too had faced hardship, working tirelessly to provide for her children while keeping their spirits alive. Perhaps that was why the sight of this widow stirred something deep within him. There was a connection, however faint, between her world and his own, but Taza quickly shook off these thoughts. He reminded himself of his duty. The elders had entrusted him with this task because they believed it was necessary for the survival of their people. If the settlers were allowed to stay, more would follow. and soon the Apache way of life would be erased entirely. The land was sacred, a gift from the Creator, and it was the responsibility of every warrior to defend it. Yet, as he watched the widow tend to her daughters, brushing hair from their faces and whispering words of comfort, he couldn't shake the feeling that taking their lives would be wrong. Night began to fall, and the desert grew cooler. Shadows lengthened and merged, creating pockets of darkness that offered perfect cover for someone skilled in stealth. Taza moved closer to the cabin, his footsteps silent as a whisper. He pressed his ear to the wall, listening intently. Inside, the sounds of bedtime rituals filled the air. The rustle of blankets, the murmur of voices, the occasional giggle from one of the girls. Finally, silence fell, broken only by the crackling of the dying fire. Taza waited, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his knife. He knew he should act quickly, slipping inside and ending things before dawn broke. But as he stood there, poised to strike, doubt crept into his mind once again. He thought of the stories his grandfather used to tell him when he was a boy, tales of warriors who had faced similar choices, whether to take a life or show mercy, and how those decisions shaped the course of history. Some had chosen vengeance, believing it was the only way to protect their people. Others had chosen compassion, risking everything to forge new paths of understanding. Taza wondered which kind of warrior he wanted to be. Was he willing to sacrifice his honor for the sake of duty, or was there another way? The moon rose higher in the sky, casting a pale light over the desert. Taza stepped back from the cabin, his mind racing. For now, he decided to wait. He would return tomorrow and the day after that, until he understood more about this family and their reasons for being here. Only then would he decide whether to carry out his mission or find another solution. As he mounted his horse and rode away into the night, the image of the widow and her daughters lingered in his thoughts, refusing to fade. Little did he know, this decision would set him on a path that would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him. The next morning, Taza returned to the edge of the settler's homestead, his movements cautious and deliberate. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, but already the widow was up and working. She moved with a quiet efficiency, tending to the chickens and gathering eggs before turning her attention to the struggling garden. Her hands were calloused and rough, evidence of years spent laboring under the unforgiving desert sun. Taza watched from a distance, hidden among the rocks and scrub brush, as she worked tirelessly to keep her small family alive. There was no sign of laziness or greed in her actions, only resilience and determination. Nearby, the two girls played in the dirt, their laughter carrying on the breeze. They chased each other around the yard, their bare feet kicking up little clouds of dust. Occasionally, they would pause to help their mother, handing her tools or fetching water from the well. It was clear that these children were not spoiled or sheltered. They understood the value of hard work and shared in the burden of survival. Taza found himself marveling at their energy, their ability to find joy even in such difficult circumstances. He couldn't help but compare them to the children of his own tribe, who also grew up quickly and learned to adapt to the challenges of life in the desert. As the day wore on, Taza noticed something troubling. The younger girl, whose name he did not yet know, seemed weaker than usual. She stumbled while playing and leaned heavily against her sister for support. Her face was pale, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. The widow immediately rushed to her side, scooping her into her arms and carrying her back inside the cabin. Through the gaps in the walls, Taza could see the woman cradling her daughter, her lips moving in silent prayer. She placed a damp cloth on the child's forehead and held her close, rocking gently as if trying to will strength into her frail body. Taza felt a pang of unease. He recognized the signs of illness all too well. It was common among his people during times of scarcity. Without proper care, the child might not survive. For a moment, he considered leaving, reminding himself that this family was not his responsibility. But something deep within him refused to turn away. Perhaps it was the memory of his own sister who had died young after falling ill during a harsh winter. Or perhaps it was the way the widow clung to her daughter, her desperation mirroring the pain he had once felt. Whatever the reason, Taza knew he couldn't simply walk away. That night, after the stars had emerged to blanket the desert in their cold light, Taza made his way back to the cabin. This time, he carried a small bundle with him, a mixture of herbs and roots blessed by the shaman of his tribe. These plants had healing properties passed down through generations of Apache healers. He approached the cabin slowly, his footsteps muffled by the sandy ground. The fire inside had burned low, casting faint shadows across the walls. Through the cracks he could see the widow still sitting by her daughter's side, her eyes red from crying. Taking a deep breath, Taza knocked gently on the door. It was a bold move, one that could easily end in violence. He braced himself for the worst, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. Inside, he heard a sharp intake of breath, followed by hurried footsteps. The door creaked open just wide enough for the widow to peer out, her face pale and drawn. When she saw Taza standing there, her expression shifted from fear to anger. She clutched a knife in one hand, its blade glinting faintly in the dim light. Her voice trembled as she spoke in broken Spanish, demanding to know why he had come. Taza raised his hand slowly, showing that he meant no harm. He pointed to the bundle in his arms and then gestured toward the sick child inside. His words were few and halting, but he managed to convey his intention. He had brought medicine to help. At first, the widow hesitated, her grip tightening on the knife. But as she studied his face, searching for any trace of deceit, she must have seen the sincerity in his eyes. Slowly, she lowered the weapon and stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of smoke and sweat. The younger girl lay on a makeshift bed, her chest rising and falling unevenly. Her sister sat nearby, clutching a ragged doll and watching with wide, frightened eyes. Taza knelt beside the child, placing the bundle of herbs on the floor. Using gestures and simple phrases, he instructed the widow on how to prepare the remedy. She listened intently, nodding, as she absorbed his instructions. Together they brewed a tea from the herbs, its bitter aroma filling the small room. The widow coaxed her daughter to drink, murmuring soothing words until the child finally swallowed. For hours, Taza remained by the family's side, ensuring the remedy was administered correctly. He offered advice on keeping the child cool and hydrated, sharing knowledge passed down by his people. The widow, though wary at first, began to trust him. She thanked him quietly, her voice trembling with gratitude. As dawn approached, the girl's condition seemed to improve slightly. Her breathing grew steadier and some color returned to her cheeks. Though it was too soon to say whether she would fully recover, the change was enough to give the family hope. When the sun rose, Taza prepared to leave. He gathered his belongings and stepped outside, pausing to look back at the cabin one last time. The widow stood in the doorway, watching him with a mixture of relief and curiosity. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment an unspoken understanding passed between them. Taza realized that this encounter had changed something within him. What had started as a mission of vengeance had transformed into something else entirely. A chance to bridge the gap between two worlds. Over the following days, Taza continued to visit the family, bringing food and supplies whenever he could spare them. Each trip to the cabin revealed more about their struggles and their strength. The widow spoke of her late husband, a kind man who had dreamed of building a better life for his family in the West. She described the hardships they had faced after his death, the loneliness, the hunger, the constant fear of danger. Yet despite everything, she refused to give up. Her determination inspired Taza, reminding him of the resilience of his own people. During these visits, Taza also taught the girls practical skills that would help them survive in the desert. He showed them how to find water in the dry riverbeds, how to identify edible plants, and how to start a fire using friction. The older girl, whose name was Maria, proved to be a quick learner, eagerly absorbing every lesson. Her younger sister, Rosa, was slower to recover but gradually regained her strength under the care of her mother and the mysterious Apache warrior who had become an unexpected ally. As time went on, the bond between Taza and the family grew stronger. They shared meals together, their conversations bridging the language barrier with gestures and smiles. The widow, whose name was Elena, expressed her gratitude in countless ways, often offering Taza gifts of fresh bread or woven blankets. Though their backgrounds were vastly different, they found common ground in their shared humanity. Taza began to see the settlers not as enemies but as individuals trying to carve out a life in a harsh and unforgiving land. Yet, despite the growing connection, Taza knew he was walking a dangerous line. His actions had not gone unnoticed by his fellow warriors, some of whom viewed his behavior with suspicion. Rumors spread among the tribe, fueled by those who believed Taza had betrayed his people by helping the settlers. The elders called him to a meeting, their faces stern as they questioned his loyalty. Taza defended his choices, arguing that compassion and understanding were not weaknesses but strengths. He reminded them of the Apache values: respect for life, wisdom in decision-making, and courage in the face of uncertainty. Though the debate raged on, Taza remained steadfast in his belief that there was another way. He envisioned a future where the Apache and the settlers could coexist peacefully, learning from one another instead of destroying each other. It was a radical idea, one that challenged centuries of conflict and mistrust. But as he looked at Elena and her daughters, he knew it was a vision worth fighting for. And so, with each passing day, Taza continued to stand guard over the family, protecting them not just from physical threats, but from the prejudices that sought to divide them. In doing so, he became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, bridges could be built where walls once stood. As weeks turned into months, Taza's visits to the settler family became a regular part of his life. Each trip brought new challenges and discoveries, strengthening the bond between him and Elena, Maria, and Rosa. The widow had grown more comfortable. Around him, her initial fear replaced by gratitude and trust. She often greeted him with a warm smile, offering whatever little food she could spare as thanks for his help. Taza, in turn, continued to bring supplies: dried meat, fresh berries, and medicinal herbs that he gathered during his travels. These exchanges were simple yet meaningful, creating a rhythm that felt almost natural. Maria, the older girl, was eager to learn everything Taza taught her. Her curiosity knew no bounds, and she peppered him with questions about the desert, the stars, and the Apache way of life. Sometimes she would mimic his movements when he demonstrated how to track animals or set snares, her small hands trying to copy his skilled gestures. Though she didn't always get it right, Taza couldn't help but chuckle at her determination. He saw in her the same spark he had once possessed as a boy, a hunger to understand the world and thrive within it. Rosa, on the other hand, remained quieter, still recovering from her illness. But even she began to show signs of improvement, venturing outside more often and joining her sister in their lessons. One day, while showing them how to identify edible plants, Rosa surprised everyone by correctly pointing out a patch of wild onions. Taza praised her warmly, and the pride in her eyes was unmistakable. It was moments like these that made Taza realize just how much this family relied on hope, not just for survival, but for happiness amid hardship. Yet despite the growing connection, tension simmered beneath the surface. News of Taza's actions had spread far beyond the immediate circle of warriors who patrolled the area. Some members of the Apache tribe viewed his alliance with the settlers as a betrayal, a dangerous compromise that could weaken their resolve against encroachment. Whispers reached the elders, who called another meeting to discuss the matter. This time the discussion grew heated, with voices rising in anger and frustration. "You are putting our people at risk," one elder shouted, slamming his fist on the ground. "The settlers will see your kindness as weakness. They will take advantage of us, just as they have taken our land." Taza listened carefully, his expression calm but resolute. When it was his turn to speak, he stood tall, meeting each elder's gaze without flinching. "These settlers are not invaders," he said firmly. "They are survivors like us. They struggle every day to live in a place that does not welcome them. If we judge them all because of the actions of others, we become no better than those who harm us." His words sparked murmurs among the group, some nodding in agreement while others shook their heads in disbelief. One elder, an older woman known for her wisdom, spoke up. "Taza is right," she said softly. We cannot fight every battle with violence. Perhaps there is value in understanding our enemies, or finding ways to coexist. The debate raged on late into the night, but eventually, a decision was reached. The elders agreed to allow Elena and her daughters to remain on the condition that they respect Apache boundaries and traditions. In return, Taza would act as a mediator, ensuring that both sides upheld their promises. It was a fragile truce, built on trust that could easily shatter if tested. But it was a start. With the elders' blessing, Taza returned to the cabin, carrying news of the agreement. Elena listened intently, her face lighting up with relief when she understood what it meant. "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't know how to repay you." "There is no need for repayment," Taza replied gently. "Just promise me that you will teach your daughters to respect this land and its people as much as you respect your own." Elena nodded earnestly, vowing to honor the agreement. From that day forward, Taza took on a dual role, protector of the settler family and guardian of Apache traditions. He visited the cabin regularly, bringing updates from the tribe and sharing stories of his culture. In return, Elena invited him to share meals with her family, introducing him to recipes passed down through generations of her ancestors. These shared moments created a sense of unity, bridging the gap between two worlds that had once seemed irreconcilable. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, Taza sat outside the cabin with Elena and her daughters. They had finished dinner, and the air was filled with the sounds of crickets chirping and the distant call of a coyote. For a while, no one spoke. The silence was peaceful, unbroken except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then, Maria broke the quiet, asking a question that caught Taza off guard. "Do you ever miss your family?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Taza paused, considering the question. He thought of his mother, who had raised him after his father's death, and of his younger siblings who had looked up to him as their protector. He missed them deeply, though he rarely allowed himself to dwell on it. Being a warrior meant sacrifice. It meant putting the needs of the tribe above personal desires. But here, surrounded by this makeshift family, he found himself longing for something he hadn't realized he'd lost. "Yes," he admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I miss them very much." Elena reached out, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," she said kindly. "You have us now." Her words struck a chord deep within him, stirring emotions he hadn't felt in years. For so long, Taza had defined himself by duty and honor, believing that love and loyalty belonged only to his tribe. But here, in this unlikely place, he had found a second family, one that accepted him without judgment or fear. It was a revelation that changed the way he saw the world, opening his heart to possibilities he had never imagined. As the days passed, Taza's presence became a source of stability for Elena and her daughters. He helped repair the roof of the cabin when heavy rains threatened to collapse it, showed Elena how to preserve food for the winter, and taught the girls how to defend themselves in case of danger. In return, they shared pieces of their own lives, their hopes, dreams, and fears. Through these exchanges, Taza came to understand the depth of their resilience. They were not invaders or conquerors. They were simply people trying to make a home in a harsh and unforgiving land. Word of Taza's efforts spread beyond the immediate community, reaching other settlers who lived nearby. Some viewed his actions with suspicion, unwilling to believe that an Apache warrior could act out of compassion rather than strategy. Others, however, saw an opportunity for peace. Slowly, cautiously, lines of communication began to open. Settlers approached Taza with questions about the land, seeking advice on how to navigate its challenges. In turn, Taza encouraged his fellow warriors to engage in dialogue, emphasizing the importance of understanding over conflict. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and misunderstandings, moments when old prejudices flared up and threatened to undo all the progress that had been made, but Taza refused to give up. He believed wholeheartedly in the possibility of coexistence, in the idea that two vastly different cultures could find common ground if given the chance. And so, he continued to build bridges, one step at a time, proving that even in the harshest landscapes humanity could bloom. By the end of the season, the relationship between the Apache and the settlers had begun to shift. What had started as a tentative truce blossomed into something deeper, a fragile but hopeful partnership based on mutual respect and cooperation. Taza's role as mediator earned him admiration from both sides, cementing his status as a leader who valued wisdom over force. Yet, despite the accolades, he remained humble, knowing that true strength lay not in domination but in unity. As he rode back to his village one evening, the stars twinkling overhead like scattered diamonds, Taza felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known before. He had set out on a mission of vengeance, driven by duty and tradition. But along the way, he had discovered something far greater: the power of compassion to heal wounds and forge connections where none seemed possible. And as he gazed at the horizon, he knew that this journey was only the beginning. The days grew shorter as autumn settled over the desert, bringing with it cooler temperatures and a sense of change that hung in the air like the scent of rain on dry earth. Taza's role as mediator between the Apache and the settlers deepened, becoming more complex but also more rewarding. He spent his mornings traveling across the rugged terrain, checking on the families who lived near the edges of Apache territory. Some were wary of him at first, their eyes narrowing as he approached, but Taza's calm demeanor and genuine concern eventually won them over. He offered advice on how to survive in the desert, where to find water during droughts, which plants could heal wounds, and how to avoid dangerous animals. In return, the settlers shared stories of their own struggles, revealing glimpses of lives shaped by hardship and hope. Elena and her daughters remained at the heart of Taza's efforts. The widow had begun to thrive under his guidance, her garden producing enough vegetables to sustain them through the coming winter. She had even started trading surplus crops with neighboring settlers, using the bartered goods to improve their modest home. Maria and Rosa continued to learn from Taza, their skills growing alongside their confidence. One afternoon, while teaching them how to weave baskets from reeds found near the river, Taza noticed how much they had changed since he first met them. Maria carried herself with a quiet strength, no longer the timid girl who had hidden behind her mother's skirts. Rosa, too, had blossomed, her laughter ringing out across the yard as she chased after a stray chicken. Watching them, Taza felt a warmth in his chest, a pride in knowing he had played a small part in helping them survive. But not everyone welcomed this newfound cooperation. Among the Apache, there were still those who viewed Taza's actions with suspicion, believing that kindness toward the settlers would only invite further encroachment. These dissenters spoke openly about their fears, warning that if the tribe did not act decisively, they would lose everything: their land, their traditions, their very identity. Their words stirred unrest, causing rifts within the community. Even some of Taza's closest friends questioned whether he was doing the right thing. "You cannot trust outsiders," one warrior said bluntly during a heated discussion. "They will take what they want and leave us with nothing." Taza listened patiently, his jaw tightening as the argument unfolded. When it was his turn to speak, he chose his words carefully, knowing that the future of his people and the fragile peace he had worked so hard to build depended on what he said next. "I understand your fears," he began, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "I share them, but we cannot let fear dictate our actions. If we shut ourselves off completely, we risk losing something far greater than land. We risk losing our humanity." His response sparked murmurs of agreement from some, though others remained unconvinced. Sensing the divide, the elders called for another council meeting to address the growing unrest. This time the gathering was larger, drawing warriors, hunters, and healers from distant parts of the tribe. The atmosphere was tense, charged with emotion, as each side voiced its concerns. Some argued that the settlers were too numerous to coexist peacefully, pointing to reports of new homesteads springing up along the borders of Apache territory. Others countered that violence would only escalate the conflict, leading to bloodshed on both sides. As the debate wore on, it became clear that finding a solution would not be easy. In the midst of the turmoil, Taza turned to Elena for support. He confided in her about the challenges he faced, sharing his frustration and doubts. To his surprise, she listened without judgment, offering words of encouragement when he needed them most. "You're trying to do something difficult," she told him one evening as they sat together outside the cabin. "Not everyone will understand, but that doesn't mean you're wrong. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone." Her faith in him bolstered his resolve, giving him the strength to face the elders once again. At the next council meeting, Taza proposed a bold idea. Instead of viewing the settlers as enemies, the Apache should focus on establishing clear boundaries and fostering mutual respect. He suggested creating designated areas where settlers could live without infringing on sacred lands, monitored by trusted members of the tribe to ensure compliance. It was a radical concept, one that required compromise on both sides, but Taza believed it was the only way forward. The elders deliberated for hours, weighing the risks and benefits of such an arrangement. Finally, after much discussion, they agreed to implement Taza's plan on a trial basis. They assigned him the task of overseeing the initiative, trusting his judgment to navigate the complexities of diplomacy. Though the decision eased tensions temporarily, Taza knew that maintaining the peace would require constant vigilance. Any misstep could reignite old hostilities, undoing all the progress they had made. With the council's approval, Taza set to work, marking the agreed-upon boundaries. He traveled from settlement to settlement, explaining the terms of the agreement and urging the settlers to honor the Apache's wishes. Many were receptive, grateful for the opportunity to live in harmony with their neighbors. A few, however, resisted, arguing that the restrictions limited their freedom. Taza handled these encounters with patience and firmness, reminding them of the importance of cooperation. "We are not asking you to give up your way of life," he explained. "We are asking you to share this land with us, to treat it and each other with respect." As the weeks passed, the boundaries began to take shape, marked by stones painted with symbols sacred to the Apache. These markers served as reminders of the promise made by both sides, a vow to protect the land and preserve the delicate balance between two cultures. Taza took great care in placing each stone, ensuring that its position reflected the spirit of the agreement. He often brought Maria and Rosa along, teaching them the meaning behind the symbols and encouraging them to see themselves as stewards of the land. One day, while working on the boundary line, Taza encountered a group of settlers who had recently arrived in the area. They were led by a man named Thomas, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with a commanding presence. Unlike many of the other settlers, Thomas seemed skeptical of Taza's intentions, eyeing him with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. "Why should we listen to you?" he asked bluntly. "What gives you the right to tell us where we can and cannot go?" Taza met his gaze evenly, refusing to be intimidated. "I am not here to control you," he replied. "I am here to protect my people, and yours. If we do not work together, this land will become a battlefield. Is that what you want for your children?" Thomas hesitated, glancing at the young boy standing beside him. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then slowly, he nodded. "Fine," he said gruffly. "We'll follow your rules for now. But if anything goes wrong, it's on you." Though the exchange left Taza uneasy, he accepted the challenge, knowing that earning Thomas's trust would take time. Over the following weeks, he made a point of visiting the man's homestead regularly, offering assistance and answering questions about the land. Gradually, Thomas's attitude softened, replaced by a grudging respect for Taza's dedication and fairness. It was a small victory, but one that reinforced Taza's belief in the power of perseverance. By the time winter arrived, blanketing the desert in a thin layer of frost, the relationship between the Apache and the settlers had stabilized. The boundaries held firm, respected by both sides thanks to Taza's tireless efforts. Celebrations marked the season, with shared feasts and storytelling sessions bringing the two communities closer together. Elena hosted a gathering at her cabin, inviting neighbors and Apache elders alike to share in the festivities. As they sat around the fire, laughing and exchanging tales, Taza felt a profound sense of accomplishment. What had once seemed impossible had become reality, a testament to the strength of unity over division. Yet even as he basked in the warmth of the moment, Taza remained mindful of the challenges that lay ahead. Peace was fragile, requiring constant care and commitment. But as he looked around at the faces illuminated by the flickering flames, he knew that the journey was worth every sacrifice. For in bridging the gap between two worlds, he had discovered something far greater than duty or honor. He had found a path to true understanding. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly be difficult, he walked it with hope in his heart, knowing that even in the harshest landscapes humanity could flourish. Winter deepened its grip on the desert, turning the barren landscape into a stark and quiet world. The mornings were crisp, with frost clinging to the dry grass and rocks like a fragile lacework that melted away under the weak winter sun. For Taza, this season brought both challenges and opportunities. The cold made travel more difficult, but it also forced people to rely on one another more than ever. The settlers huddled in their cabins, rationing firewood and food, while the Apache braved the elements with practiced resilience, sharing resources among their own, and occasionally extending aid to those who lived near their borders. Taza continued his work as a mediator, ensuring that the boundaries he had helped establish remained respected. He rode out often, checking on the markers he had placed and speaking with settlers about any issues they faced. Sometimes he carried bundles of dried meat or blankets to families struggling against the harsh weather. These acts of kindness did not go unnoticed. Among the settlers, Taza's name became synonymous with trust and fairness. Even those who had once doubted him now greeted him warmly, their gratitude evident in their smiles and words of thanks. Elena and her daughters remained central to Taza's life, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. The widow worked tirelessly to keep her home warm and her daughters fed, but she never complained. Instead, she found joy in small moments, watching Rosa build a snowman outside the cabin or listening to Maria hum songs she had learned from Taza. On particularly cold nights, Elena invited him to join them by the fire, where they shared stories and laughter. These evenings reminded Taza of the warmth of family, something he hadn't realized he missed until now. One such night, as the wind howled outside and the fire crackled softly inside, Elena turned to Taza with a question that caught him off guard. "Do you ever think about staying?" she asked, her voice hesitant but sincere. Taza paused, unsure how to respond. He had grown close to Elena and her daughters, but he had always seen himself as a warrior first, bound by duty to his tribe. The idea of leaving behind the life he knew felt overwhelming, even if the thought of staying stirred something deep within him. I don't know," he admitted finally, his gaze fixed on the flames. "My place is with my people, but—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Elena nodded, understanding the weight of his responsibilities. She didn't press further, letting the moment pass without comment. Despite these personal reflections, Taza's focus remained on maintaining peace between the Apache and the settlers. It was no easy task. As the weeks went by, tensions began to rise again, fueled by misunderstandings and old grudges. One incident in particular threatened to unravel everything Taza had worked so hard to achieve. A group of young Apache warriors, frustrated by the presence of settlers near their hunting grounds, lashed out, damaging property and frightening several families. News of the attack spread quickly, reigniting fears among the settlers and angering some who called for retaliation. When Taza heard what had happened, he acted swiftly. He tracked down the warriors responsible, confronting them with a mix of sternness and compassion. "You have shamed us," he told them firmly. "We promised to protect these people, to show them we are not savages. What you have done proves otherwise." The warriors hung their heads, ashamed but defiant. "They do not belong here," one of them muttered. "Why should we care what happens to them?" "Because they are human beings just like us," Taza replied. "If we cannot control our anger, we are no better than those who harm us. Do you want to be remembered as men of honor, or as cowards who destroy without cause. His words struck a nerve, silencing the group. Though they still harbored resentment, they agreed to make amends, helping repair the damage they had caused and apologizing to the affected families. Taza accompanied them, ensuring that the apologies were heartfelt and sincere. To his relief, the settlers accepted the gesture, though some remained wary. It was a reminder that trust, once broken, took time to rebuild. Meanwhile, tensions among the Apache themselves continued to simmer. Some elders questioned whether Taza's approach was too lenient, arguing that compromise only weakened their position. Others supported him, believing that coexistence was the only way to ensure survival. These debates often spilled over into heated arguments, dividing the tribe and testing Taza's leadership. At times he felt torn between loyalty to his people and his vision of a peaceful future. Yet through it all, he clung to the belief that understanding could overcome hatred. To strengthen the fragile alliance, Taza organized a series of gatherings, designed to foster goodwill between the Apache and the settlers. These events included shared meals, storytelling sessions, and demonstrations of traditional skills. Warriors taught settlers how to track animals and start fires using friction, while settlers shared knowledge of farming techniques and metalworking. Children played together, their laughter bridging cultural divides. Slowly but surely, the barriers between the two groups began to crumble. One evening, during one of these gatherings, a settler named Margaret approached Taza with tears in her eyes. Her husband had died months earlier, leaving her alone to care for their 3 children. Life had been unbearably hard, but she credited Taza's efforts with giving her hope. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "You've given us a chance to live, not just survive." Taza placed a hand on her shoulder, moved by her words. "You are strong," he told her gently. As spring returned to the desert, bringing with it the promise of renewal, Taza stood atop a rocky ridge overlooking the land he had fought so hard to protect. The frost had melted away, leaving behind fields dotted with wild flowers and streams that sparkled in the sunlight. It was a sight that filled him with both pride and reflection. Over the past year, he had walked a path few warriors dared to tread, one of compromise, compassion, and courage. He had faced challenges that tested his resolve, made sacrifices that weighed heavily on his heart, and forged connections that defied centuries of mistrust. And yet, as he gazed at the horizon, he knew the journey was far from over. The relationship between the Apache and the settlers had grown stronger, though not without its struggles. There were still moments of tension, disagreements over boundaries or resources that threatened to reignite old conflicts. But these incidents were fewer now, handled with patience and dialogue rather than violence. Taza's role as mediator had become indispensable, his presence a calming force in times of uncertainty. He traveled frequently, listening to grievances from both sides and finding solutions that honored the needs of all. His reputation spread beyond the immediate region, earning him respect not just as a warrior but as a leader who valued peace over power. Elena and her daughters remained at the center of Taza's life, their bond deepening with each passing season. Maria had blossomed into a confident young woman, her curiosity about the world matched only by her determination to make it better. She often accompanied Taza on his travels, eager to learn more about diplomacy and leadership. Rosa, too, had grown, her once fragile body now strong and lively. She loved to sing songs she had learned from her mother, her voice carrying across the desert like a melody of hope. Watching them thrive brought Taza a sense of fulfillment he had never imagined possible. Yet there were moments when doubt crept into his mind. He thought often of Elena's question, whether he had considered staying with her family. The idea lingered, tugging at his heartstrings whenever he saw the warmth in her eyes or felt the laughter of her daughters around him. But Taza knew his duty lay elsewhere. He belonged to the Apache, to the people who had shaped him, trusted him, and relied on him. Leaving them would mean abandoning everything he had worked for, undoing the fragile peace he had helped create. Still, the longing for something more, a family of his own, remained. One day, as Taza prepared to leave Elena's cabin after a shared meal, she stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "I know you have to go," she said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "But promise me one thing." "Anything," Taza replied, meeting her gaze. "Promise me you'll take care of yourself," she said. "You've given so much to everyone else. Don't forget to give something back to yourself." Her words stayed with him long after he rode away, echoing in his mind as he navigated the rugged terrain. For the first time, Taza allowed himself to consider what it meant to find balance, not just between two cultures, but within himself. He realized that while his work was important, it did not define him entirely. There was room in his life for love, for joy, for the kind of happiness he had helped others find. In the weeks that followed, Taza began to make changes. He spent more time with Elena and her daughters, sharing stories and laughter under the stars. He taught Maria how to ride a horse and showed Rosa how to track animals, their giggles filling the air as they stumbled through his lessons. He even started carving small wooden figures, a hobby he had picked up from watching settlers, and gave them to the girls as gifts. These moments, though simple, brought him a kind of contentment he hadn't known before. Meanwhile, the alliance between the Apache and the settlers continued to flourish. Shared celebrations became a regular occurrence, drawing people from miles around. Warriors danced alongside farmers, children played games invented by both cultures, and elders exchanged wisdom passed down through generations. The boundaries Taza had established remained intact, respected by all. Even Thomas, the skeptical settler who had once questioned Taza's intentions, became an advocate for cooperation, speaking openly about the benefits of working together. But perhaps the most profound change came within the Apache tribe itself. Inspired by Taza's example, younger warriors began to embrace a new way of thinking, one that prioritized understanding over aggression. They sought opportunities to connect with settlers, learning skills and traditions that enriched their own lives. Elders noticed this shift, their initial resistance giving way to cautious optimism. Though some still held on to old fears, the majority recognized that Taza's vision of coexistence was not weakness, but strength. One evening, during a gathering beneath a sky ablaze with stars, the tribal elders called Taza forward. They presented him with a ceremonial necklace, its beads crafted from turquoise and bone, symbolizing unity and wisdom. "You have shown us a new path," one elder said, his voice filled with pride. "A path that honors our ancestors while paving the way for future generations. You are no longer just a warrior. You are a bridge between worlds." Taza accepted the honor humbly, his heart swelling with gratitude. As he looked out at the crowd, Apache and settlers alike, he saw faces illuminated by firelight, united in celebration. It was a moment that transcended differences, proving that even in the harshest landscapes, humanity could bloom. In the months that followed, Taza continued his work, balancing his responsibilities as a warrior and a mediator, with the growing desire to build a life with Elena and her daughters. He spoke openly with the widow about his feelings, and to his relief she shared them. Together they envisioned a future where their worlds merged, not perfectly, but harmoniously. It would require effort, compromise, and unwavering commitment, but Taza believed it was worth every challenge. As summer approached, bringing with it the promise of abundance, Taza stood once again on the ridge overlooking the land. This time, however, he was not alone. Elena and her daughter stood beside him, their presence a reminder of the family he had found in the unlikeliest of places. Below them, the desert stretched endlessly, vast and untamed, yet alive with possibility. Taza took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past and the hope of the future settle within him. He had set out on a mission of vengeance, driven by duty and tradition. But along the way he had discovered something far greater, the power of compassion to heal wounds, forge connections, and transform lives. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Taza smiled. For the first time in his life, he felt truly at peace.